Taming the High Cost of College, Ep082.
You have kids, they grow up, and before you know it, it's time to plan for college.
Where do you start?
How much is it going to cost?
Will you qualify for financial aid?
Should you be looking into scholarships?
When will you be able to retire?
What about student loans?
The list of questions is never ending. The good news is, all the answers are right here. Welcome to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Here is your host, certified financial planner, Brad Baldridge.
Hello and welcome to Taming the High Cost of College. I'm your host, Brad Baldridge. Today we have a great interview with Jason Lum. He's going to talk to us today about some of the misconceptions about scholarships. So if you're a family and you're thinking about college and scholarships, there's certainly things you can and should be doing. And Jason's going to talk a little bit about how many families think that just the high-end students qualify for scholarships. And that's simply not true. There are scholarships out there for many, many different types of students with many different talents and many different endeavors. So I encourage everyone to listen to this. I also offer the free scholarship guide for busy parents. So after listening to this episode, if you want to learn more, you can go to Taming the High Cost of College/scholarships, and there you can sign up for our guide that will help you understand how to find scholarships, where to look, and whether or not your family should be in the running and pursue scholarships, or if you're better off pursuing other ideas. But this is a great episode where you learn a lot from Jason. And again, show notes are available at Taming the High Cost of College/82 for this particular episode. That's all we have. Let's go ahead and jump into the interview with Jason. Thanks. All right, today we're sitting down with Jason Lum. He's the president of ScholarEdge. Welcome, Jason.
Hi, Brad. Nice to be here.
All right, before we jump into the nitty-gritty, why don't you tell people a little bit about what you do and how you came to do it?
Absolutely, Brad. And again, thanks for the opportunity to talk to your audience. I've been president of ScholarEdge College Consulting this is my 16th year, and I did this actually almost by accident. I'm a lawyer by training, and I practiced in a law firm for a decade. But what I decided to do while practicing law was to give lectures to local audiences in high schools and community centers about applying for scholarships. Because frankly, all I wanted was public speaking experience, because as most lawyers know, you don't often see the inside of a courtroom. Most of their time is spent in an office. And what wound up happening after doing this just for half a year or so is parents would call my office. And they'd say, Jason, we really enjoyed your lecture on scholarships. And they were impressed, I think, primarily by the fact that I won over $250,000 in scholarship money that funded my entire post-high school education, which included my bachelor's from Washington University in St. Louis, my master's from Harvard University, and my law degree from UC Berkeley. And I'm not a Californian, so I wasn't paying the in-state rate. So it was a very expensive price tag to all of these schools. And I graduated debt-free. And in my naivete, I thought, boy, there must be lots of folks out there that apply for scholarships because, with college costs escalating the way they are, there must be lots of folks doing this. Well, it turns out to be the exact opposite. So families were calling me up saying, boy, we're not getting much help from our high school. The topper's not being addressed at all. Would you mind working with us one-on-one? And that's how it got started. I tried to be a part-time lawyer and a part-time college consultant, and I don't like, multitasking too much. So at some point I made a decision where, I really enjoy working with kids and their families a lot more than I do protecting a company from another round of litigation. So I made the choice to go into college consulting, and I haven't looked back. It's been a terrific experience since then. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of families, not only all across the United States, even though I'm based in Minnesota. Most of my families don't live in Minnesota, but also internationally, if you can believe that. With the advent of Skype and with FaceTime, it's incredibly easy to work with international students as well. So that's how it all got started. And my practice, like I said, is based here in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis, St. Paul. And the families I work with have just been terrific. It's been a wonderful experience so far.
All right. Well, great. So obviously you've been working a lot with students and their families. What do you think is some of the big misconceptions people have out there about when you say like scholarships aren't addressed? What are the big areas that people don't understand that they should?
That's a great question, Brad. The top misperception out there, I think by far and away, is that the only people who can win scholarships are those students who have straight A's, perfect ACT or SAT scores, and who are, I always joke during my lectures, they're perceived as brains with appendages. And a lot of kids and a lot of moms and dads, to be honest with you, look at these kind of kids and say, boy, my son or daughter has no chance of winning a scholarship up against this fellow. Well, the reality is that brainiac with the 4-point, whatever GPA and 36 on the ACT score, I'll guarantee you that 99% of the time that kid will not be applying for any scholarships at all during his or her academic career. And that's not the competition that families need to be worried about, because actually there isn't much competition out there. There's lots of awards that I've won, and I've won well over 40 to 50. I lost track a long time ago, but I've won somewhere in the area of 40 or 50 scholarships, ranging from $250 to $70,000. But I was always struck, and I'm still struck today, by how few students actually apply. And of those students who do apply, they really do not tend to be the A-plus superstar scholars out there. And there's a good reason for that too, Brad. It's because those kind of students, right, we're talking about students with academics in the stratosphere, oftentimes schools will want them so badly that they'll throw money at them to come on campus. And alternatively, a lot of these students also, there is an arrogance factor, I hate to say, among some students where they've always done well in school, and they have this idea that why waste my time applying for scholarships? I'll just study in school and kind of ignore this issue. And when I graduate from X, Y, or Z college, I'll get this wonderful job that'll pay this all back very quickly. Well, that's not the reality nowadays, as most of your listeners probably know.
Right. Yeah, I see a lot of debt that's overwhelming, and I also see perhaps some unnecessary debt as well.
Absolutely. And I tell, this might seem counterintuitive to a lot of your listeners, but I always tell parents that, believe it or not, when I counsel families, I don't counsel them to look for the schools with the cheapest price tag. Now, that might seem odd coming from someone who is a big believer in scholarships, who hates loans with every bone in his body. But I tell families to actually ignore the price tag, or I call it the MSRP. That anyone who's bought a car knows what that is. That's the price that the auto manufacturer wants you to pay for the car. But I always tell families that just like when you walk into a Ford dealership, there's a price that they want you to pay, and there's a price that you want to pay. So if a student, walks into my office and is eager and has the grades and the test scores to get into a fine institution that happens to have a really big price tag, I tell the families, you know what? Number one, there's good debt, there's bad debt. Bad debt really is a car loan. I mean, the minute you drive the car off the parking lot, it's lost, a huge chunk of its value. But good debt to me is investing in yourself, and fundamentally that's education. So what I tell students to do is, find the right fit for a college. Don't look at the price tag, okay? And then once you identify the colleges that are the best fit for you, then let's devise a strategy built heavily upon scholarships where we can attack the student debt that you're going to accrue if you do nothing. And there's also another reason why I tell families to do this, which is the majority of students in this country who go to college, as you know, Brad, go to state, public universities. state universities, okay? And the temptation is to look at the price tag of these schools, especially if you're living, if you want to go to the local state university and you look at the price tag, you go, my goodness, it's really, really cheap, as opposed to, say, going to a Yale or going to a Reed College in Oregon, for example. I mean, these are schools that are north of $60,000 a year. But the reality is that a school like Yale has the financial resources before a student even applies for scholarships to give that kid and that kid's family lots and lots of money. State University probably won't be dishing out a whole lot of money for even an in-state student. So ironically, I have lots and lots of families who get their acceptance letters back from the schools that they applied to, and they look at their financial aid award letters, and believe it or not, 9 times out of 10, the local state university winds up to be one of the more expensive options if the student has applied to a lot of private colleges and universities.
Right. Yeah, I've seen that as well, where you can often go to a private university for a similar price as a public, sometimes slightly more, sometimes slightly less. On the flip side, of course, not always does it turn out that way. And I think it's important that families try and figure that out a little bit ahead of time, because you don't want to be worrying about the final price tags at the very end of the process, going from completely in the dark to, oh, surprise, these are the prices, and you may like them, you may not, but now it's too late to come up with an alternative.
That's absolutely right. I'll never forget, even today I still remember this, because when I was at Harvard, and at Harvard you have to sign, your life away with all, you have to sign all these promissory notes before you graduate. They don't give you your degree. At least when I was going to school there, you didn't get your degree until you signed all these forms promising to pay back all these loans you took out. And Harvard University obviously attracts a very talented group of students. And you would think that these are people that would keep very close tabs on the amount of debt they were accruing in graduate school. I remember students going for what was, we called it back then, exit interviews. So you'd have an appointment with a financial aid officer. It lasted for only 5 or 10, 15 minutes. And you just sign all these promissory notes. And I can't tell you how many students would leave those meetings actually in tears, because they realized just how much additional debt they had just accrued. Because remember, I went to Harvard for graduate school, so all of my classmates had already had 4 years of college under their belts. So they're walking out of these rooms and they're in tears because they know that this is additional debt to the debt they've already accrued from college, where in 9 times out of 10, the student probably didn't apply for a single scholarship in college, as in graduate school. So this is not a problem that's isolated to any one income class, or to any gender or any ethnicity, or even to any caliber of school. This is a national crisis. And students, it is so incredibly easy, Brad, as many of your listeners know, it's incredibly easy for a family to forget just how much debt is being accrued, because especially with subsidized loans, you don't get a whole lot of mail from the lender while you're in school.
Right.
So it's easy to forget about this kind of stuff until the very end. And that's, in many cases, that's when students finally have that horrible aha moment. And that's what I really want families to avoid. I always tell my audiences that your son or daughter is not going to win every scholarship they applied for. I didn't win every scholarship I applied for. But if you stick with it, you will come out with something. And let's assume a worst case scenario. I have a lot of respect for someone who at least tried, through 4 years of college, through 2 or 3 years of graduate school. Someone who's tried to apply and just wasn't very successful. I have tremendous sympathy for that family, because that student gave it his or her all. But that's not the typical student today. The typical student today just accepts every loan that's offered to them from the government or from private lenders, and doesn't do anything at all proactively to apply for scholarships. it may sound harsh, and I apologize for that, but I just don't have a lot of sympathy for a family that doesn't take this seriously, because this really is a serious issue.
Right. All right. So let's say I'm the parent of a junior, and I guess based on your experience, what should I be doing differently so that we get on a different path?
A couple of things. Parents of juniors, first of all, the number one thing that a parent needs to do is to illustrate as vividly as possible to their son or daughter the definition of debt in the real world. A 16 or 17-year-old doesn't know what debt is. I mean, they've never taken out a loan. I mean, they can't take out a loan because they're minors. So they have no perception of what debt is, what it can do to you. I always tell my families, if you have someone in your family, maybe it could be mom or dad, but if you have an uncle or an aunt or a relative who is, who appears to be very well off, but is still paying off their student loans, invite them over for dinner, have them talk one-on-one with your son or daughter, and really have them explain to them just how hard it is to eliminate all the student debt that you've accrued. So really trying to emphasize, number one, to students, what debt can do to your lifestyle, what debt, how debt can dramatically transform what you hope to, the life you hope to lead after college, as opposed to the life you want to lead. Number two, a lot of the things that students can do to improve their college applications are exactly the same things that will reap dividends for scholarships. So for parents out there, if your son or daughter is not active in the community, is not volunteering, is not showing some level of social vision, in other words, there's nothing on the paper that indicates that your son or daughter has really tried to improve their local community, then we have a problem here. Forget about college applications for a second. When it comes to scholarship applications, you're not going to win much money at all if you cannot convince a committee of individuals that your son or daughter is someone who has a deeply felt compassion for those around him or her, and it's a cliche, I know, but it does ring true, that really shows evidence of wanting to make the world a better place. And number three, I would say this. Parents, I know that it is exceptionally overwhelming just how much stuff is out there on the internet. I mean, when I applied for scholarships back in the 90s, but there was no internet. I mean, I'm not making this up. There was absolutely no internet. So there weren't all the scholarship resources that I had were in these large Yellow Pages sized books. We still have those today, but now we have the internet, and that's completely transformed this whole process. And there's lots and lots of books out there. Yeah, and I think a lot of parents are frankly paralyzed by the fact that there's just so much stuff out there. Parents have to realize sometimes less is more. So, there's some great websites out there. I mean, the biggest one is fastweb.com. I have no affiliation with any of these scholarship websites, by the way. But fastweb.com is the one that, a lot of folks go to. If you wind up registering with 10, 20, or 30 different scholarship websites, there's going to be incredible duplication. You're going to be spammed to death. So really just focus on a couple of really good resources, and also really scour resources in your area. I'll give your listeners a great tip, and this has worked very, very well for a lot of my families. This is especially true if you happen to live in a large urban area. One thing that high schools have done very well over the last 5 years is that whenever they get a scholarship announcement from a local organization, let's say the local Elks Club, or it might be a local civic organization, they might send an email out to all the local high schools about this new opportunity. Well, what these high schools are doing now, thankfully, is they are uploading them to their web page on the high school's website, and they're even hyperlinking that scholarship to the application itself. So it's made it so easy for students to find awards and to literally apply online. What I tell families to do is pick out, this is one time where quantity is a good thing here. But I would tell families, the top 10, 15 high schools in your area, at least based in terms of the quality of their academics and the robustness of their website. I guarantee your listeners that almost all these high schools will have a page where the guidance counselors will list scholarships available to their students. And just because it's a different high school doesn't mean that you have to go to that high school to apply for the scholarships listed on their webpage. So that's what one thing high schools are doing very well. They're really updating these pages, and why I say them to families and their children, check these pages out. I mean, it doesn't have to be a daily thing, but maybe once a week, maybe once every couple of weeks, check it out, see what's out there. Local awards are the best opportunities. They don't often come with the most money, but I love local scholarships because it almost always means less competition.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about how you know if you're a good candidate to pursue scholarships, though. I mean, is this anybody and everybody should be doing this? Is this certain students? I mean, I guess in my experience, I've dealt with a lot of families where they intend to do scholarships, but they never quite get around to it. Mm-hmm. But I also deal with families that, they do a few and they don't win much. So as an example, I'll typically have a family that will say something along the lines of, well, we have a average kid that participates in a couple sports, and they're not superstars by any means. Maybe they don't even play very much, but they participate. And they participate in a club or two, and they're in band, and they spend a lot of time on their Xbox. Where are the scholarships for my kid? We're a suburban family, mm-hmm. et cetera, et cetera. And what's your response to that type of question?
I get it all the time. The variation that I get, Brad, is mom or dad will go to the local Barnes & Noble, buy one of those large scholarship books, throw it on Johnny's stomach while he is watching television or playing Xbox, and tell him, you're going to be applying for 5 scholarships by the end of next week. Get moving on this.
Right.
And I tell parents that that's not the right approach. And to go to your question, who should be applying and who really shouldn't be applying, I think I'm a parent. I have 2 kids, and as much as a parent wants to do the applications themselves, resist that temptation at all costs, because the student has got to be all in on this. If the student is not willing to invest the time, to invest the passion in this, it's not going to happen, because scholarship committees will see through this very, very quickly. And surprisingly, the people, a lot of folks, when I'm asked this question, often think that I'm going to say, well, you shouldn't apply for scholarships if you have a 2.5 GPA or didn't do very well on the standardized tests, or maybe you're not an all-star athlete. That's actually not a criteria that I use in terms of who should and shouldn't apply. I'll give you an example, because I'm really a person that thinks by examples. One scholarship I won was the Rotary Foundation Ambassadorial Scholarship. And for your listeners who are Rotarians, I think they'll probably be nodding in agreement with this. Rotary, as a lot of people know, is based hugely on humanitarian principles. And if you have a student with a 4.0 GPA and a very high ACT score, but as evidence, no community service, no volunteerism whatsoever, then you have Mary, 2.8 GPA, maybe a 25 on the ACT, but spends all of her free time with Habitat for Humanity or really involved in her church or her synagogue. Mary will win that scholarship every time. So I say that the ideal candidate for a scholarship really is someone who's motivated, someone who is invested in their community. Obviously, the higher the grades, the higher the test scores, the better. But that is not people confuse college admissions with how scholarship decisions are made. So If the student's not motivated, if the student is not going to do anything, regardless of how much mom and dad pushes him or her, it's not going to happen. That's just the truth of it. But like I said earlier, fear can be a very powerful motivator. If a student meets someone who's deep in debt, or has the opportunity to talk to someone who has applied for scholarships and who's won quite a bit of money, and can tell that student just how life transforming that was, that can make a big difference.
Right. Well, I understand that, but so if you've got the student that, and I guess that's where I'm driving is, and what I tell parents, if you have that student that has something unique about them, they have been active in the community, they have been active in sports, they have been, I always use the example of if you've got a student out there who's an archer and happens to compete at the state level in archery, that's relatively unique. That's something that could potentially be a scholarship topic for that student. I guess where I don't know if there's a solution for this, but again, we go back to the kid who spends most of his time on his Xbox and is pretty average elsewhere. Are there scholarships for that kid? Well, and I guess I know the answer to that. There are some scholarships out there, but I think the competition and the number that would qualify is also very large as well. Should parents push that kid or do something different, or is it just move on to some other strategy?
I think parents should push that kid. I think every kid has the potential to have that aha moment where they realize, boy, this is a new stage in my life. I'm now officially an adult. And, a lot of the responsibility of education falls on my shoulders. To get to your question, when I have students that are average in terms of like the student, the hypothetical student we talked about, what I try to do with students like that is I meet with the family. Usually the child, usually the student is not the one to tell me this, but I'll look at mom and dad and say, what does Johnny enjoy doing in his free time? And, Johnny might tell me, but more often the parents will tell me, but Johnny just loves archery. I mean, he's not, the top archer in the state of New Jersey, but he loves it. He goes out there all the time. What I tell families to do is to identify all the interests that your student has and to draw a little tree diagram, with little branches sticking out, and find organizations out there. I mean, Google has transformed everything. That's not new news, but it might be surprising to your listeners about how helpful it is for scholarships. But if Johnny loves archery, maybe he loves cooking, maybe he really enjoys fishing. Identify groups out there that have a membership that's closely aligned to the student's interests. Also, it's important to look at what mom and dad do and who they are, and make a tree list from that as well. You'd be surprised how often students are not even completely sure about all the different components of their ethnic background. One thing I always laugh about is I'll ask a student what his or her ethnicity is, and they'll say white. And I tell them, that's not an ethnicity. An ethnicity is Polish or French or whatnot. But for example, if dad is part Italian, that might open the door to lots of money from Italian-based organizations in the United States. So what you want to do is to find linkages between what mom and dad do and who they are, what Johnny does, and what organizations are out there that have a natural overlap with those interests. And the next step after that, this is where Google doesn't come in that handy. This is where you have to pick up the phone. But call these organizations up and just ask them very politely, obviously, that that you're looking to do as much as possible to defray the cost of education. Does your organization offer any sort of scholarships for people that have an interest in archery, for example? Even if they say no, and at this point, most students and most mom and dads will hang up after saying goodbye. But I wouldn't stop there. I would say, I'm sorry to hear that you don't offer any scholarships, but can you give me a list of 2 or 3 organizations that might? And that's the question that often hooks you in to real opportunities. And that's a follow-up question that families really need to answer to get answered. It worked very well for me, by the way. I knew very early on that I had a very strong interest in government, in law, in business. And of course, the first places I checked out were the American Bar Association. I was in the Boy Scouts. I'm in the Eagle Scouts. So the Boy Scouts of America have a ton of scholarships available to those who want to apply. So you want to find that overlap. The analogy that I like to use is you don't want to throw out a net that's 5 miles long and catch a lot of fish you aren't going to eat. I mean, cast out a net strategically and try to capture those opportunities that make the most sense for you. So that's why I say that, I really do believe this, Brad, that every student has the potential to win scholarships, but it's just a strategy that's often not well aligned to the result intended.
Right. All right. So let's flip the coin a little bit. Let's say we do have the kid that's got something very extraordinary about them. What would they do that might be different, or any other ideas? Let's say we have the passionate guitar player who is already playing in bands and working with top rate instructors and potentially a strong candidate for some sort of audition. Or we have someone that's extremely active in high school government, so where they're representing their high school at the state or national level or whatever. I mean, just there's all kinds of potential.
Sure.
You name it. There's, someone that's passionate about anything, right? Going to national robotics competitions, science fairs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a gazillion things that kids could be at the state or national level in. And if that's true for your kid, what might you do extra or different that maybe we haven't mentioned yet?
I would do everything I would have done with Johnny, the guitar player, but not anything, not a special guitar player. But the one thing that I would do differently in that case, Brad, those are the kind of kids that have the ability, that have the potential to win massive amounts of money, even in high school, because those are the kind of kids that can go up against hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of competitors and possibly pull it off. The average high school kid, like Johnny, for example, Johnny can still win scholarships. Is Johnny going to win a scholarship for $10,000? No, because the higher the dollar amount at stake, the more interest it generates from applicants, right?
Right.
So Johnny is very likely to win a whole bunch of awards, maybe for $250, $500, and it does add up. But when you have that very special student, those are the ones that can apply for major awards. And what I mean by major is anything over $5,000 is going to generate some interest. And it goes up exponentially the higher the dollar amount at stake. Those are the kids that, even if they're newbies in terms of applying for scholarships, because they have that something special, they're the best guitar player, one of the top guitar players in the country. They perform in a band that actually gets gigs and gets paid for it. They're going to generate more interest. Now, they're going to have more competition, but the time invested in the applications for those students is justified by their increased chances of winning. That's why with Johnny, the average guitar player, I wouldn't tell him to apply for a $50,000 scholarship as a junior in high school because his chances are so low. I don't want to waste his time or his family's time. But let's take Barbara. Barbara is that guitar player that is nationally ranked and who is playing in the band and maybe even has a pop star career in front of her. I would tell her something very different. I'd say, look, still go for the smaller awards because, those are easy pickings. But at the same time, you do have what it takes, that X factor, if you will, that gives you the opportunity to win the higher dollar amount awards. You can handle the additional competition because of what's in your background. And one thing I should tell your listeners also is that, ironically, the vast majority of scholarships that someone applies for, there's no interview component. It's a paper-only process. But when it comes to, but when you start to get to scholarships at the $10, $20, $30,000 or more monetary range, an interview frequently becomes part of the equation. So, it does help if Barbara, on top of being a great guitar player and everything else, is also articulate and can really express herself well about her achievements and about this extraordinary record that she has. So it's a somewhat different approach, and somewhat there's similarities and differences. But I think with the all-star student, they can handle more competition and they can do well if they do the right things in applying for those higher end awards.
Right. In addition to that, even if they work at it and they don't win the big awards, maybe they just win a couple of the small awards. I think the process of the competition and the self-advocating and the prepping and the writing and all the stuff that they would get involved in is a great learning process, even if they don't win the prize, so to speak.
You're absolutely right, Brad. And I'll use my experience as a perfect example. When I first started applying for scholarships, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. Nobody was there to guide me. There was no Google. My high school guidance counselor, a fantastic woman, but she had never won a scholarship herself. So I had to learn by doing, by trial and error. So even if you don't win a scholarship, and this is something that the families should really keep in mind through this process. Your son or daughter, if they're doing everything right, they still shouldn't be winning every scholarship because it would just defy the laws of mathematics. But from every scholarship you don't win, this is what I recommend families do. Do a post-game analysis, so to speak. In most cases, it's perfectly okay to call up the scholarship organization if your son or daughter has not won. Obviously, don't be angry. Don't be sour grapes about this. But this, what I would say is, I'd call up the organization and say, I understand the results have come out. My son unfortunately didn't win, but I certainly respect the results. I know it must have been very hard to make those decisions. What could my son or what could my daughter have done differently, or what did you look for this year that really helped the winners to get over the top? And families might be surprised by this, but I used to do this all the time. And I can't recall a single time when a person wasn't willing to give me some information about that topic, about why didn't you get it, and what did the winners have, what were they looking for? And that also leads to my next point, which is if you don't win a scholarship one year, and if your son or daughter is still eligible to apply the following year, by all means, go for it. Because they start off every year's application process like a brand new page, like the previous year never happened. All right, so they're not going to remember that Johnny applied last year and didn't get it. But what Johnny will be the following year is a much more informed applicant. Hopefully, he and his family will have contacted the organization, find out how Johnny could have improved his application. And you know what, Brad? There's many instances in my career as a student where I didn't win an award one year and came back the following year and won it. So it happened to me quite frequently.
Wow, that is a great strategy there. All right, well, I think we've covered scholarships in a great degree here. But before we wrap up, I would love to kind of get information out there about what it is that you do and how people can reach you if they want to learn more.
Sure. First, I appreciate the time, Brad. It was wonderful to talk to your listeners. I'm best contacted through my website. It's www.scholeredge.com. My email address is jason@scholeredge.com, and I reply to every email, and I answer every email that I receive. If you want to give me a ring, I'm at area code 651-765-7485. I'm in the Central Time Zone, but like I said, most of the families I work with are from all across the country and across the world. So if any of your listeners have an interest in learning more information, I welcome them to send me an email or drop me a line.
All right. Well, great. You've been a wealth of knowledge. I really appreciate you being on, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks a lot, and good luck to your listeners and their sons and daughters in this process. All right. Thank you. Thank you. All right. That was a great interview with Jason. Hopefully you learned a lot about scholarships. Again, Taming the High Cost of College /scholarships, we have additional resources where you can download 4 videos that will help you understand how to pursue scholarships, where to find them, the different types of scholarships. So there's a lot of great information. And after watching these 4 videos, you should be able to decide if you're going to pursue scholarships and how to build a plan to be the most successful that you can be as far as pursuing scholarships. All right, that's all we have for today. As always, show notes are available at our website at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. If you're enjoying these shows, I would appreciate it if you went to iTunes or Stitcher and left a review. And as always, there's additional shows available at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. So we've got shows about all different aspects of college planning, including how to pay and plan for college, scholarships, test planning, careers and majors, online courses. There's all kinds of wonderful information available. And go to Taming the High Cost of College and check things out and find a couple other episodes that you may be interested in. Or you can also go to iTunes or use your favorite podcast app as well to get additional episodes. That's all for today. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Taming the High Cost of College podcast. Now it's time for you to take action. Head to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com for show notes, bonus content, and to leave feedback for Brad. The next step on your college journey starts now.
Brad Baldridge is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research and an investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad owns 2 companies, Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions. The Baldridge companies are not affiliated with Cambridge Investment Research.